Hey everyone, welcome to episode number 25 of the High Frequency Podcast. Welcome to all the new subscribers and listeners that we've had over the last month. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, please consider subscribing to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on, or please consider subscribing to the YouTube channel because we do now have video format, which we've not had prior to this year. Also, if you're a long-time subscriber of this podcast and you've got lots of stuff out of it over the years, please do consider being a Patreon supporter. You can find the link to our Patreon in the description of this podcast or in the description of this YouTube video, whichever one you're listening or watching on. Our guest today is called Simone Fougère. She's been spinning vinyl in London, Europe and Ibiza since 1999. She's had residencies at clubs in London such as the End and Match Bar. She's also played many other underground clubs across London and festivals such as Bestival and Snowbombing. More recently, she's been living in Ibiza with a residency at Benirras Elements, playing at Villa Fashion and art private parties. Between 2000 and 2004, she managed a record label called Kog Transmissions, where she promoted New Zealand electronic music and brought artists to play in London at Fabric nightclub. In 2020, she moved back to New Zealand and started a weekly radio show on AoteaFM Great Barrier Island, where she's located. She aimed to showcase a journey into electronic sound, exploring the origins and genres of electronic music. Simone is someone who's been recommended to me several times to have on this podcast. I saw her at Shipwreck Festival earlier on this year where she went back to back with a friend. It was late afternoon, early evening, and it was deep, it was groovy, it was a little bit of early 2000s, it was fully vinyl, and it was exactly what the crowd needed at that time. And she had them moving until the mid-evening point where some of the larger guests came on the main stage. I really enjoyed her set, really vibed with the music, and really wanted to get her onto the podcast to find out a little bit about her history, and what got her into DJing in the first place. It was a fantastic chat that we had today, so I'm really looking forward to presenting you with this episode. So let's dive straight into Simone Fougère. Simone, welcome to the High Frequency Podcast. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for inviting me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Logan Baker mentioned you to me a long time ago, and he said, you should really have this girl on the podcast. She really knows her stuff. She's spent a lot of time in Ibiza. And my ears pricked up immediately when I heard you were a vinyl DJ, and then I saw you at Shipwrecked, and I thought, okay, gotta have this lady on the podcast. So I'm pleased that you're here. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, you're welcome. I love sharing about music, so happy to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'd love to dive into everything music and everything you. So I've read a little bit about you before, and I understand that you've spent a bit of time over the other side of the world, and obviously you've played Shipwrecked the last, I don't know how many years now. So Simone, I guess what I usually do is ask the guest, a little bit about the history, kind of how they got started in this kind of electronic music scene and where music has taken them, and everything in between. So tell us a bit about yourself.
Wow, where to begin, I suppose. I maybe like you, I don't know. I know people of our kind of age probably would have said the same and started in the same genre, which was trance. Back in, I was at Otago in 94 till 97, and went up to the Gathering one year and really enjoyed that music up there. But before that, actually, in 1993, I went to Holland. I'd grown up in Indonesia, between New Zealand and Indonesia, and one of my closest friends had gone back to Holland after we graduated. So I went to see her, and we went to, it was a rave, I suppose you call it then, in Rotterdam, and we had smart drinks. I don't know if you remember what smart drinks were when they came out.
No. What are they?
Early 90s. I mean, all I can remember them being called or described as like amino acids, and they gave you like some energy or something. So we went along to this rave in this big warehouse and had our smart drinks while everyone had whatever they had. And we had a great time. We were up all night dancing, and it was the first experience I'd really had going out to a big party like that. I mean, there had been a little bit of that kind of thing in Indonesia, in Jakarta, where I grew up, and I spent my last high school years. I used to go to quite a few different nightclubs from the age of 15 till like 6 at night, That's what we did as expat kids over there. So I didn't really know what the music was, but I liked going out and dancing. And yeah, that my first big experience was, I suppose, going to this big trance rave in Holland. So I came back to New Zealand and started university in 1994, and my friend used to send me mixtapes from Holland, and I was just always saying, "Oh, trance is the best music in the world" to everyone. And then I went to the Gathering in '97, and through those sort of formative years, I suppose, and at university, listening to electronic music, because I didn't really have much of a music kind of introduction, I suppose, with my parents. It was more like Lionel Richie and Boney M and that kind of thing. I never really listened to much of the early electronic music. I never got anything through them. Gosh, now all these other things are coming to mind, like you know how it all sort of pinpoints together. I did a whole like sort of timeline for myself this morning, just so I remember stuff. But specifically, electronic music was getting introduced into trance, and then going to the Gathering in New Zealand, but then getting into the music industry was when I finally left New Zealand in 1998 and went to London and lived with a bunch of Kiwis through my friend's older brother. And I was just there. I'd only been there like, I don't know, 2 weeks or something, and had Christmas. And this one Kiwi guy who was visiting, we were just talking. I can't even remember how it came up or why I even wanted to do it. But he suggested I go and get some turntables. So I was like, okay. So I went and got some belt drive Sound Labs. Was it Sound Lab? I think it was called Sound Lab. These turntables. And this funny little mixer, I can't even remember the name of it. And then just started to teach myself how to play. But I went and got lots of secondhand promo records at the time. I didn't even know what they were. And my first record was as DJ Sneak, Can't Hide From Your Bud. So suddenly I kind of moved out of the trance thing and suddenly went into house, sort of this Chicago-y sort of sound and a bit of breakbeat. And just spent, the next sort of year, 1999 and 2000, I suppose, teaching myself how to play with these crazy belt drives, which I imagine you probably learnt on as well at some point.
At some point. I'm grateful that we don't have them anymore.
yeah I was like, how does this even work? It was just like everything was like, it was like elastic. I was like, how do people mix this together? I had no idea what I was doing. I had learned the piano when I was 9 for about 3 years, but other than that, I didn't have much musical knowledge, I suppose, formal training anyways. So yeah, I mean, obviously the story continues, but that was my entrance in. It was just a friend suggesting I get some decks, and I went and did it. I suppose I had been making a lot of mix tapes as a youngster, recording stuff off the radio, and doing little radio shows with my sister when I was young. But I think everyone does that kind of thing, or did that kind of thing, when we did that sort of thing with cassettes, recording off the radio. So it was in me somewhere, this idea of playing music and sharing it. But yeah, I just started to discover more and more music that I liked, that I wasn't hearing anywhere, that I wanted to share. That's always been my intention behind it.
Yeah, nice. So what was the intention of going to London? Was that just your OE, or did you intend to go over there permanently?
I intended to go there permanently.
Okay.
I like I said, I grew up between New Zealand and Indonesia, so it was Auckland and Jakarta. Very, very different upbringings. I was born in Oman in the Middle East in the mid-70s. My parents are Kiwis, but they just were adventurous and liked to travel, and so. Growing up in Jakarta was at an international school, British international school, and then an American international school, in between coming back to New Zealand and going to Westlake Girls High School and all girls uniform, and then to an American-y kind of Swiss school. So I was all over the place with my upbringing, and growing up as a foreigner in Indonesia and Jakarta, one of the most polluted cities in the world. and just having lots of different nationalities around me. When I came back to New Zealand, I went to Otago for university, and I ended up I studied architecture, and then I studied finance, fashion design, sort of in between. As you can see, I like to do a lot of different things, but
I was just going to say polar opposites.
yeah. I was like, I wanted to get out of New Zealand and be in a much more multicultural, lots of different nationalities kind of place. So London was just like the obvious place for me to go. And I had my grandparent was, my grandfather was English. So it was easy enough for me to stay as long as I could. So I didn't have to go, oh, I've got this two-year limitation. So I just went with like, I'm just going to go and see what it's like. And I had this girl who I lived with in Dunedin. She'd said to me, she'd just got back from London and she was a mature student at Otago. And she just said, yeah, I think you're going to like London. London's going to love you. Sort of, so she kind of understood that I was just, because you could just melt in. It was a melting pot. You could do what you want. No one cared. And I really felt a little bit restricted in New Zealand, I suppose. And having to be a certain way. Yeah. So it was just go to London and see what happens.
So that was 98. So how would you have described the scene at that point? Because I really only got into the electronic music scene probably around 2003, 2004-ish. So I was a little bit late to the party, I guess. But 90s. I mean, there's a big revival of the 90s, kind of this 90s music that people kind of relish to recreate, especially here in New Zealand. There's like a longing for this kind of like classic 90s sound. And how would you describe the sound at that point, especially in London, which was obviously getting a lot of it from the US at one point? So yeah, how did you find it?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of different sounds in the 90s. And Julio and I did a radio show on the local radio station, the community radio station here in 2020 when we first arrived. We decided to do the history of electronic music to kind of educate all the locals on the barrier, which is where I'm living now, Great Barrier Island. I don't think I said that. Because the first show I did, and I was just playing, my normal house music, a bit of minimal deep house. We had a phone call from this lady saying, what is this stuff you're playing? It's doing my head in. And we're like, okay. She's an older woman. And then Julia came up with this idea. He's like, well, why don't we just share the history of it and just, try and explain and show people what electronic music is and go through all the genres. So yeah, we went through all the genres and all the different years from the 1900s up, and then the 90s is, there's quite a this is when everything kind of really started to split. And the first thing that came to mind when you said like what was there in the late 90s is that great Ibiza house music, is, when it had like all of that really good melodies that you could, and some nice vocals that you could kind of sing along with. And I'd been living in Athens for a little bit and Istanbul just before London. And it was that time, it was the summer of 98. And it was all that kind of just beautiful, fun house music that makes you feel good. And yeah, a lot of the house music it doesn't have that anymore. I mean, sometimes you get these gems that come through, but there were really a lot of them in the late 90s of that kind of Ibiza house. And then there was also the Chicago house that was really coming through, like, the DJ Sneak, record that I got. All those guys, the Derek Carter, and then there was Classic Records, and then that was more early 2000s, I suppose. But yeah, in terms of the clubbing scene, it was all quite new for me because I had done a little bit of clubbing in, well, if you call it that, in Auckland, going to the Box and then going to Calibre and stuff before I left in 98. But I was really dying to get out and see what it was like. And that's when Fabric opened. I think it was 99 Fabric opened. And then there was the End, and then there was the Velvet Rooms, which had some amazing drum and bass every Wednesday, which I used to go to. And the end, yeah, there was just a lot of good music around then. And there was Bugged Out, which would come down from Manchester, and they would do their night at the end. And there was another place they did it. Did you ever go to Bugged Out?
I was just thinking then, I've heard of that night before, but I don't think I ever went, but it was at Sankey's, wasn't it? Was it at
I think
Sankey's?
it might have been. Yeah, I never went to Sankey's
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah, I think it was, but I don't think I ever went. I ended up going to. Yeah. Anyway, it's not about me. Carry on.
Well, no, it's all very
I was
interesting.
trying to think of some of the nights that I went to at Sankey's, but yeah, I could go on forever. So, yeah, back to
Yeah.
Fabric in London.
Well, I would love to hear all about that too.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there was such a plethora of different music genres you could go and see, and there were different vibes. You know, the drum and bass scene is always different because of the way that everyone dances, and it's like this room of everyone moving together,
Yeah.
which is beautiful. Goodness, there was just so much. It's hard to put a finger on what was good. There was a really big, thriving breakbeat scene as well then.
Okay.
And I found this label.
I think
up
garage was kind of popular at that time as well, wasn't it? Like UK garage
Yeah.
was kind of coming out of this in 98, 99. I do remember there's a really classic garage track by Antonio, or oh gosh, I'm going to have to remember it because it's a beautiful record, and so many people have tried to recreate it or do edits of it recently, and it's going to drive me crazy. I'll have to tell you after I've looked it up. But you've probably got it in your collection for all I know. But
I don't think I do.
I'll send you the
Antonio, a UK garage. Huh. Maybe Julia will look it up while we're talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the UK garage scene was massive. I remember, there were all the radio, the illegal radio shows and stations and stuff, and the ones and twos, and yeah, we used to listen to a lot of UK garage on the radio then, and some of the tracks then really got signed for a lot of money. There was that Kiwi guy who got a big track signed for, like, it was, I don't know, I can't remember what he signed it for. It was like 300,000 or something, which was a lot of money at that point. But yeah, so there was a thriving scene of so much stuff. And the end was we're putting on such great nights during the week. Thursday nights they also had a drum and bass night. But yeah, and then the Chemical Brothers would come up and down and do some cool stuff. And yeah, and then the festival scene just started. It's like Homelands Festival in '99. I think that was the first one they did, and that was the first festival I went to in the UK, and that was amazing. I was just blown away. It was like 5 massive outdoor tents, and there was the drum and bass tent, and then there was the house tent and the techno tent and the garage. Yeah, and then aside from Glastonbury having all those big tents too, that was the only kind of dance festivals at that point, and then all the dance festivals just started happening from that.
At what point did you start playing in bars and clubs then? Because obviously you got these turntables when you got over to the UK. It was obviously a bit of a fun thing to start off with, but it must have taken you somewhere, whether you had the intention or not. So at what point did you start playing gigs, and how did you get led into that?
Well, yeah, I don't know what my intention was except to learn how to use these things. And I was living in Putney with these Kiwis at first, and then we all moved to Fulham, and we had this really nice, funky, modern house, and they were all builders. And one of them, Plumley, said, "Oh, do you want me to build you a decks table?" So he built this decks table, and I had them set up, and then I used to just play for us, on a Sunday afternoon or when we got home from clubbing or something like that, and just playing my records. I don't remember. I think I was probably a bit like shy and not really doing too much mixing. But then where was that? That's 99. Then I came back to New Zealand in 99, 2000, and Pavement magazine came out, and they had this like 100 top creatives in New Zealand or something. And I think on the cover were Kog Transmissions, and there were 6 of them, 6 of the guys who started Kog Transmissions, the record label. And they yeah, they were in this, and I sort of read about them. I was like, these are the guys that put out the Gathering CD. I really like that music that I heard. I didn't even know who the artists were. So I contacted them and I just said, would you ever think of releasing music in the UK? There's all, you've got all this amazing stuff. Well, can I come and have a chat? Can I help in any way? So I went round to their place in Kingsland, and they were filming some really weird alien music video at the time, and sort of tiptoed over all these weird things I'd made and cables everywhere, and had a chat with Chris Chetland, who was the sort of head honcho at the time. And they were all sort of studying at university and also doing the record label. And so that was the first connection. I think it was 99, 2000. And then went back to London, just came here for like 3 weeks or something. And then I went to Glastonbury, through a friend I'd met at the end. And I didn't know much about Glastonbury, but he just said, come along with me. And he was actually the son of the guy who produced the Dark Side of the Moon and mastered the Pink Floyd album, Jerry. And so Jerry and I went actually with his friend Ben and Jerry and me went to Glastonbury. And as you did in those days, you just they had the fence, but then, it was all sold out and I didn't really know what I was doing. He's like, no, we just go to the fence and we can just sneak in and you just give this guy a $5 and you get in. But that was the year there were like 200,000 people, and I lost my camera in a massive crowd thing. And it was pretty dodgy, and I left a little bit early, I think on the Sunday morning, but I did meet a girl there called Anna Neville, and then we realized her boyfriend lived in Clapham, which is where I was living at that point in 2000, and he was into making music. Tom Neville is his name, and then his friend Martin Dawson, and they were all living in Clapham. I was in Clapham, and it was like, wow, okay, I've got to meet some English people who are into making music, and they play records. And I just somehow, maybe I suggested, there was this pub down the road in Clapham Junction called Inigo, and it just opened, and this guy was like up for anything. So we said we'd like to do the Friday night, and I started playing there as the warm-up DJ. And then the three guys would play after me. And that was just hectic every Friday night, just craziness, people all over the bar, and lockups. Lockups, is that what they're called, I think, afterwards?
Lock-ins, I think.
Lock-ins,
thing, right?
lockups.
They're locking you up inside. It's the same thing.
Yeah. So I started gingerly kind of just playing out there then. And then and they were really encouraging, the guys, which is really nice. And then I met a girl through them who was more my age, although there was only like 2 or 3 years between us. I suppose I was about 24 at that point. And she was running a drum and bass label, and had like quite a lot of the big guys. And she moved in with me, and then she goes, I'm going to start a night at the end on a Sunday, a day party. Do you want to play and manage the funky room? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I started playing at the end in the funky room on a Sunday at a hard house night. So hard house, which I hated with all my men. I couldn't stand the music, but all the Kiwis and Australians who came over to London were just like straight into hard house. And I suppose it was a bit like me. It was my entrance with trance, and their entrance was kind of in hard house. It was just too fast for me. I couldn't take it. So I was in the funky room playing my funky music. And again, I was always just the first one playing. And then the guys who I played with at Inigo would play as well. And we'd have this great day party. So yeah, that was kind of my entrance. So that was in 2000. And then I had gone back and kind of connected with the New Zealand music scene with Kog. And then he came over, Chris, in August 2000, and then we met, hung out, had a chat. He went off to Popcom for a music conference, and then after that then we just started chatting, and I said, well, do you want me to run the label for you in London? Because they had been thinking about doing a label in London, releasing music, because I was just like, you've got so much great music, because they had like 5 or 6 umbrella labels under Kog Transmissions, which was like house, minimal techno, dub, hip hop, ambient, and yeah, he was like, let's do this. So that's how I started in the music industry, and then also playing at the same time.
Cool. That's a bit of a journey in London, isn't it? I mean, it's funny because everyone always starts on these warm up sets, and I believe that the warm up sets are actually the hardest set to play. They're the most skilled set to play, I reckon, because you literally have to create the scene for the environment. You have to create the energy for the better, quote unquote, better and more prolific DJs to come on and play after you. And if you don't do that, they're going to be coming onto a really flat crowd. So
Yeah.
I always find it quite interesting how we start out in the most difficult warm up set, the most difficult set of the night, but that's the way that we all start, right?
Yeah. It's true. I mean, at the time, I guess I sort of felt quite relaxed about it because there's no one on the dance floor. I don't really have to do anything. But maybe it wasn't then I was just sort of creating my thing. But it's true. It is. Yeah, there is. I suppose there is a pressure in the end that you have to have a dance floor for the next DJ to play on. But in a way, people just start arriving and start dancing anyway. But yeah, if you're playing good music, otherwise they're not going to be on the dance floor.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, you definitely have to start somewhere, and it's a good place to start gently, I think, at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. So, what year did you leave London?
So, I kind of left in 2000, mid 2010, and went up to
Okay.
Norfolk and Norwich, um, and then came to help a friend, my boyfriend at the time, renovate his house, and then moved back to London and at the end of 2011,
Okay.
just for about
So
8 months. Yeah.
you were in the UK were in the UK for almost 10 years over 10 years, I guess. So, in that entire time, did you gain any residencies in London? Any consistent gigs and any large gigs? Because I think from I may have read this incorrectly, but you may have played at Fabric at some point.
Yeah, so with the New Zealand record label Kog, we so they started sending me the masters on a CD, and then I go and do all of the dub, get the dub plate made, mastered, and then get some promos, get that cut, and then get the promos made, and then the test pressings, sorry, and then get the promos made and then mail them out and do all the press and talk to Jockey Slut, talk to Mix Mag, talk to all the magazines, trying to get reviews. And then once we had a bit of a kind of following, although it wasn't too hard to get too much following because there were a lot of New Zealanders obviously there, and there was a New Zealand newspaper which we're happy to promote anything in New Zealand, obviously. And when when it was a good time, I suppose, Chris and Hamish, or H, he's called, who I was working specifically on. He was working with me on the UK Europe stuff. They said, let's do a New Zealand night, and let's do it at Fabric. So I organised it at Fabric for them, and it was on a Thursday night. And they were a bit like, yeah, you're going to do something on a Thursday night? How are you going to get people? And we actually, at that time, I think it was 2000 and maybe 2001 or 2002, maybe at that point, 2002. It was the biggest night they'd seen. On a Thursday, or in total, no, it was probably just on a Thursday. It was the biggest night they'd seen. It was totally sold out and packed, and they were just like, and there was a massive line down the street, and they were like, how are you doing this? And of course we had people like Congo Dawn playing, and Pitch Black, and goodness, I've got the flyer somewhere and trying to remember who was playing. Fully came over for it, I think, and maybe Subware. So I played in the third room at Fabric that night, and it was actually a really good set that I played. I was really happy with that set. But I haven't played on a normal night at Fabric. I would have loved to. I would still love to, but so that was my Fabric kind of thing. But in terms of residencies, I had this residency at the end on the Sunday, and then I was playing every Friday at Inigo. And then while I was doing the record label, I needed to get an extra income, because literally I'd said to the guys in New Zealand, like, just pay for my rent. Let's just cover my rent, which was a nice big room so I could have a home office. But, you know, that was tough, because then I had to get 2 other jobs, really. I got a job at Billy Nasty's DJ agency in Brixton, because I'd moved to Brixton at that point. So I was doing that a couple of days a week. And then I got a residency at Match Bar, which was this cocktail bar kind of chain. Like, there were 3 or 4, one in Clerkenwell, one in Brick Lane, that opened up, and it was very fancy, but they were really open to, you know, having a DJ playing big music, house music, on a Saturday night. So I played for 4 hours every Saturday night at this place in Soho, just down from the end, and I go to the end afterwards. So from 8 till midnight, and that was really good to just get used to playing, like, and bringing, you know, and creating the dance floor, you know, from the first hour into then everyone dancing around the whole bar by midnight. So that was my residency, and then at the end doing the funky room. And then I played, and then I partnered up with my partner who I ended up getting married to, because he was American, and we needed to live in the same country. And we started doing a bit of a half live act, and remixing things like the White Stripes and Nirvana, and he would play live guitar and we'd sing, and then we'd have a house beat underneath it, and then we would also play records around that sort of thing. And then we launched a thing called Kitchen Party in 2006, which was a live streamed house party, from our house. That was the intention, for it to all be live, but the first I don't know how many we did, probably like 20 of them. It was 4 hours long each. We would just film them, and then we'd put them up on the internet. And we're sponsored by this streaming tank, who had actually done this. They were the first ones to stream something live. I don't know if it was in the world, but it was when I was living in Brixton, and they'd launched this girl's singing career, and from her basement she was singing and playing guitar. I don't know if you remember that. It was probably 2004 maybe. But we contacted them and said we want to do this live house party around the world and connect everyone, and call it Kitchen Party. And so they supported us, and we did. Yeah, it was not cheap though to make it live. It was going to be like £1 an hour for every viewer. So if we got 100,000 viewers, it was going to be 100,000 times 4. Although I was happy to go live the whole time, my partner wasn't so happy, because I was like, oh, well, if we get that many viewers, then I can get sponsors and stuff very easily to pay for it. And then my idea was, because it was all about eco, I was a real greenie, typical greenie at that point, before I realized it was all contrived and controlled by industry for the money. So I wanted to see the clubbing scene much more green. I was sick of seeing all these plastic straws everywhere, and people didn't even think about, twice about using them. And so with our little house party that we created in 2009 in our house, I got 4 sponsors. One of them was the green cab company that just started up. So it was like Toyota Prius hybrid things. And then Riverford Organics, they would deliver fresh organic fruit for the cocktails. And then I got this organic spirit company to deliver like rum or gin or vodka, whichever. And then I would make a special cocktail that everyone could make in our kitchen at the party. And we would compost the fruit. And then I also got Baloo Water to sponsor us, and they were doing wells in Africa for clean water and things. So I had them on the website, and I got them as sponsors. But then my idea was, if we went live and we owed a lot of money to the streaming guys, that it would be like I'd approach Vodafone or something and say, okay, you've got to turn your logo green for 3 months or something. Not 3 months. You've got to turn your logo green if you want to be sponsoring us on our website, and then you've got to implement something within your organization that's going to make it more green. And so that was my kind of concept and idea, which, well, we didn't do in the end, but it doesn't matter. But yeah, so I was on this whole green, turning the clubbing scene green. And then we would do that every probably 3 weeks, and we would send a note around all of our neighbours. I was living near Wilson Green, Cricklewood at that point. And our neighbours were fine because they knew the music would go off at midnight, 8 till midnight, and then we would all go to a club, about 60 of us. Yeah, so that kind of became more of my my residency per se, a kitchen party concept. But through that and through Cog, originally I was getting gigs at AKA Bar, which was at the end, and just gigs all around all the little London underground clubs. And then we did a night at Pasha, which kitchen party. We did Out of the Kitchen party. Where else? There's so many little places, and we had the whole gang of like all this Spanish crew, and we'd all do club nights everywhere and swap stuff. So very much in the underground scene, and yeah, never really making it big, but I always had so many different other interests. I never really focused fully on, okay, I'm going to be a DJ and I'm going to be traveling the world and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I knew a lot of
Putting all
people
your eggs in
within
one
the
basket
scene,
at that point in
doing the
time, mate.
label. Sorry?
Oh, sorry about that. I think we froze for a minute there, but that's all right. I was just going to say, putting all your eggs in one basket at that point in time, when the clubbing scene is, I guess, still evolving, because it was still a relatively, I would say it's still a relatively new concept now, to be honest. But like back then, it was a relatively new concept on the scale that it was operating on in London. It would have been a relatively new kind of concept, and the music was ever evolving. So putting all your eggs in one basket and saying I'm going to be a DJ was probably not such a safe option maybe back then. I mean, now the market's completely saturated with DJs, so it's probably not the smartest thing now, but I'm sure there was a middle ground there where it was actually a good idea.
Yeah.
But I think that's awesome. Like you literally lived off music, and I respect anyone who's managed to do that, no matter what point in time it's happened. I think it can be such a desirable thing to do, but such a difficult thing to do, and such a daring thing to do as well. But I guess that whole follow your passion thing that people keep saying to a lot, around music, it's, I guess there's only a small amount of people that actually go and do that. So big respect for you to
Well,
actually doing that in London.
I wouldn't say that I actually lived off music. Well, no, okay, no, I did for 3 years, I suppose. When I was managing the label, I was working at the agency, and then I was doing my residency at the Match Bar. And I was just making enough money just to pay my rent and just to live reasonably well and not do too much else. And after a while, it took its toll on me, and I actually had to say the record label here in New Zealand. I came back for a summer, and we looked at all of our releases, and then I went to Australia where my parents are living, and then I was just talking to my dad, and I was like, I can't do this. I can't, have to look at my wallet and go, can I get on the bus? Can I buy a loaf of bread or something? I can't do this anymore. So I said to them, look, I'm going to go back and do my IT work, which is what I was also doing in London originally, was doing big IT contracts and earning a lot of money for 3 months, doing my head in at the investment banks, and then within central government, at the Home Office, and all around the police, loads of different things. And then, so I was doing IT work at the same time, and then dipping back into music. But for 3 years, I did manage to survive off it. And that's the thing, is you do just survive. And that's why the guest list existed. It was for all the musos who were working in the music industry, because no one could afford to go out otherwise unless you had a guest list. And it's still the same for today. I imagine for most people, it's very difficult. And the other thing is, as well, I've realized, I can try and beat myself up. I should have been producing more music and making, and I could have been a DJ, because a lot of people I know who I worked with, and I also worked in a record store in Phonica, which you may know in London.
Oh, Phonica Records. Yeah, I've been there many times. Yeah.
Yeah. So when it first opened, I worked in there, and I was working there for the first couple of years. With Heidi and who else? There's quite a few who are now really doing well, successful DJs. And then, also Tom Neville, who I was originally at Indigo with, and Martin Dawson, who's sadly not with us anymore, but he was King Rock, which you may have heard of at some point. And then he just did his Martin Dawson stuff with Giles Smith from Secret Sundays, and they were called Two Armadillos then. But so I saw a lot of people around me become very successful. But I now know the reason why I could never put my eggs in one basket is because, I don't know if you've heard of human design at all. It's kind of like it's kind of a system whereby it kind of puts every humanity into 5 different energy types, characters, kind of thing. And then there's a whole lot more to it about how you make decisions and stuff. It's a combination of astrology, I suppose, more Vedic astrology, so kind of on the right side of right constellation, on the right wheel. The I Ching, the Kabbalah tree of life, and what was the 4th one? Oh my goodness. What was the 4th one, Julio? Well, yeah, no, that's I Ching. There's 4 things and I've just forgotten the 4th thing. Anyways, so you just need to know your birth date and your birth time. And essentially it's how the energetics of this reality affect you when you're born. And then that affects you throughout your life. And you have 5 different energy types, and you've got generators, which make up about 35% of the world, manifesting generators about 32%, projectors are 17%, manifestors are 8%, and reflectors are 1%. But I'm a manifesting generator, and effectively we are the people who multitask, and we do 10 million different projects at once, and we actually don't need to do all of the ideas we have. We don't need to finish all the ideas we have, but we have to just keep pivoting and going from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. But for me, I've been beating myself up for years, like, oh, why haven't you been doing the DJing thing more? Why haven't you been producing more? But now I know I'm not meant to do that, and that's fine, because some people are meant to do that, and they're very focused, and generally they would probably be like a generator or something, but manifesting generators, it's a very interesting system, and I've understood so much more about myself, how to manage my energy, how to digest my food and information better, how to interact with people better. But yeah, until I understood that, then I was just like, oh, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. But, we're all different, and all different individuals. But it's very hard to survive in the music industry and thrive, I would say. But it's fun, and especially when you're young, you're happy to do anything for free. So it's a good place to kind of get out and have fun.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll have to look up to that human design concept. I quite like the sound of that. Sometimes it's quite hard to balance all the energies that you have in one day, let alone over your lifetime. So I get you. I understand you.
Yeah, you may well be. You may well be manifesting. Go on myhumandesign.com and you can get a free chart, and you'll just see.
Well, just going back to something you said that was really interesting, because we were talking a little bit about, obviously, you living off music for 3 years. Have you ever sort of struggled a little bit with balancing earning money, doing the conventional thing, living a life where you've got a job and you've got a steady base underneath you, and then pursuing the music thing? Because I certainly am struggling with that a lot. Balancing the two. They're 2 very opposite ends of the spectrum, or they don't have to be, but in general they are. So how have you found that over your lifetime? Have you found the balance quite hard to achieve?
I think it was easier when I was younger. Somehow you feel a bit more risk takery, and now I'm finding it really difficult. I shouldn't say that, because I don't want to program myself by saying it's really difficult to do music and do everything else. And I'm not actually doing a conventional job either. But I did get frustrated when I was having to go back to doing IT and go into the home office or something and work on a project and sit there all day in front of a computer doing spreadsheets. And I was like, I just want to be home doing music and making a mix, or doing my kitchen party stuff, or whatever. So I did. It was just really frustrating, because it's very left brainy against the right brain, your creative side, which I believe we all really are creative innately, and we've all got something creative to share. Really tough, because it's not, everyone would love to be creative, and it doesn't pay the way, in most cases. But what I have found is just being creative in my day and just small little tasks does help, and just putting action into what you want to do every day, especially as my energy type, right? Manifesting generator. As long as I'm putting a little bit of energy into something, then I feel satisfied, because that's the key for me as my energy type, is I've got to feel satisfied. As soon as I'm doing something that I'm not enjoying, I'll get frustrated, and that's a sign to just stop, drop it, and just leave it, and then go into something I'm feeling satisfied about. So I think, I mean, I've been working with this again because I knew about this about 10, 15 years ago, but I've just dived back into it in the last 3 weeks, actually. And I'm just experimenting with how I'm using my energies and how I'm creating my reality, my life really at the moment, by just noticing when I'm satisfied and when I'm frustrated. And as soon as I'm frustrated, I'm like, no, out of here. And if I get too frustrated or get angry, and that's also a sign, just really stop, and I just go and put myself to sleep or something. Just then wake up refreshed. But yeah, it's very hard to balance.
It takes an incredible amount of self-awareness and reflection to be able to do that, which I think are two skills in life that we can all learn more of, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, and also the problem with music these days is it's become so left brainy, and so just to set up this this interview, this podcast, is like, okay, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, and although in the end it's creative doing this, it's just like, oh, it's got that frustrating element in it for me anyway, which is why I went back to playing vinyl, because I played vinyl all those years, and then it was getting a little bit expensive at one point, so I was like, okay, well, I'll switch to playing CDs, and then it's like, oh, now we're doing just WAV files, and then I was like, oh, I can't stand staring at the screen. I hate LEDs, and I hate looking at just text. I cannot tell what I'm playing, so I just went, okay, well, I've got to go back to vinyl, because it was like going through your bag, and it was like, oh, I know what this track sounds like. I know what this track sounds like just from the visuals and the colors. So that's the creative aspect. And then now the music DJing thing's got very, very left brainy and very mathematical too, because I'm going, oh my God, it's got this many minutes and how much, where did that? It's just, yeah. So it's getting more harder to balance.
It's funny you've said exactly. So I had a bit of a hiatus from the podcast for about 3 months earlier this year, just due to a variety of reasons. And last month I did a bit of a podcast update to say where I was heading with the podcast, and a couple of updates about me as an artist. And I explained that exact thing. I explained why I've gone back to playing full vinyl, because I was getting a little bit too. My DJing process wasn't creative enough. It wasn't natural. It felt really structured, and it was like, oh, I've got X amount of minutes to mix out of this song, and it's like, oh shit, I don't even know what this song is because I bought it for $1 and it doesn't mean anything,
Yeah, yeah,
So it's like, you spend $30 on a record, you're going to listen to it and you're going to study it and you're going to know whether it fits into your set. And I think that tangible element of the picking the record and everything just makes it a bit more of an enjoyable experience. So I agree.
And I only buy records now that I can play at least 3 of the tracks out of the 4 on. I'm being very specific. And then if you're spending $30, like you say, it's actually not that expensive compared to buying digital in the end. And then the tracks better, and somehow there seems to be far better quality on vinyl. Maybe it's because people are like, okay, I'm putting it on vinyl, it's got to be good. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still buy some digital, and I do find some stuff that I really love on digital, and sometimes I have to play a bit of digital. But yeah, I do enjoy the whole creative process. You're up there, you're just putting on a record, and people nowadays, and I remember when I went back to it, I was like, how does this even work? Like, it's just this plastic going around. People who haven't seen it before must be like, why is that making a sound? Yet they're quite happy to accept that movies fly through the air, and so does music, in an instant, and then we're just watching and listening to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really weird, isn't it? Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And it must have been really interesting for you going through the process of actually watching a record being made and mastered back when you managed the record label. So obviously that's where you probably got your passion for records, right?
Well, I mean, I was already passionate about records then. In 98, but well, just buying it was just like I would just go out actually, and I just discovered that going to all the, you know, the secondhand shops in London, I can't remember what they're called, but they're the black and white ones. Yeah, but there was this chain of them, and I would just go to every one, and some of them were better than the others, but I would know the one in Soho is really good because everyone, and Ladbroke Grove, because everyone, no, it was the Notting Hill one, because all the DJs would get all their free promos. You know, of course, I was sending out promos as well at that point, but the promos would end up in these second-hand shops, and I'd go and get the promos because I wasn't being sent promos at that point, you know, when I was younger, when, you know, in the early days. So that was, yeah, I just had this love for going record shopping and finding all these great promos. I had no idea what it sounded like because you couldn't really listen to them in these shops. And I get home and I get, you know, quite a good hit rate because I was just like, how does it sound? I just go for the feeling. Actually, interestingly, in my human design, my intuition is all about feeling. So I've got to feel things, got to feel about the food I'm going to eat, feel about the music I'm going to play. I think perhaps that's probably what helps me the most with my DJing is I just go, I look at a record, I'm like, do I feel this? What do I feel like playing? And I just get an intuitive response, like play it, you know, in my head.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, and with the DJing with the records, sorry, go for it.
No, that's all right, carry on.
It's just much more of a game now, and it's much more of a flow. You know, there's not so much in the head thinking; it's far more intuitive.
Yeah, I know what you mean. You almost just know what record is coming next after studying your collection for so long, and the feeling thing's really important. And what I was just about to say before is that, funnily enough, my artist name, which you can see there, Vidana, is a Buddhist proverb that means feeling.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. Wow. Interesting.
I agree. It's kind of exactly how I feel when I play music. And I've kind of always prided myself, and I'm presuming you too, you know, prided yourself on your track selection in a given DJ set, because that's really what creates the energy throughout your entire DJ set, right? Your track selection. If you're bumping the energy up and down too much, it's going to be all over the place. No one's really going to get into the groove of the set. And it's always been a feeling about what record comes next. I've obviously had to study the collection that I own, but it's never been a hey, I'm going to plan my entire DJ set beforehand and just go with that. You know, I don't think I could do that. I mean, I've got a good idea of what records I'm going to play, but in what order, I don't know. You know, and that feeling element is something that I think a lot of the younger, newer DJs could learn a lot from.
Yeah, well, that's the thing as well with the digital. Then I was finding like, oh, I'm going to have to, I was finding myself planning my sets, you know, and it's not quite the same. It's just having your record bag that you've got all your great records in that are in there at the moment, and the new ones that you're putting in, and then you're taking a few out. And it's just this like revolving kind of moving feast that kind of shifts and changes. And it's interesting because my shipwreck set this year I played with my friend Priscilla, and she'd not played at Shipwreck before, and she was a little bit nervous, and she was like, I want to plan the set, I want to plan our, you know, tracks, because then of course we didn't know each other's records too. So the year before I didn't plan it, and it was much more fun, I found, for me, although I did have fun playing this year. But I know that it's the process is not so creative when you're up there, because you're like, okay, I've got this one next, and this one's going to make sure, and I'm going to bring it in here, and and it just becomes much more left brainy again if you've planned your set. I mean, it can work out really well and it can be really great, but half the time you're not in the set, and all of a sudden the set's over, and you're like, what? It's all over because you've just been going.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Before we get onto Shipwrecked, I want to go back a little bit, because you've done the London thing, you've done the record label thing, you've got your residencies in London, you've played at Fabric, you've obviously done all that sort of thing. But then I understand you've spent some time in Ibiza as well, which, as we were saying before the podcast started, has got a bit of a special place in my heart, partially just because it's so close to the UK. It was a regular for, you know, me and my friends when we were younger. And of course, there's nothing like that island. It is a party island, but it's usually a party island, or it was back then, for people who went there for music, not necessarily to get wasted and have a lad's holiday doing a stag do type thing. You know, people went for the music. At least that's what it used to be like. So tell me about your experience in Ibiza. Like, what led you there, and why were you there?
Yeah, well, again, actually, the guy, Peter, who I had met in '98 in my first few weeks in London, who was friends with all the Kiwis I was living with in Putney, who had encouraged me to go and buy these turntables, was on his way to Ibiza at that point to go and see, he was living there and he'd just come back from New Zealand. He had ended up there about 3 years before, I think, just accidentally. He'd got on the wrong ferry or something and ended up in Ibiza, and then ended up meeting this girl, and then, and then one thing led to another, and then he's living there, and now he's got a child. But he kept saying, like, why don't you come to Ibiza? Come to Ibiza, Simone, with his friend Paul, and at the time that Ibiza Uncovered was on TV. I don't know if you ever watched Ibiza Uncovered.
Unfortunately.
Yes. Yeah, so it put everyone off from going to Ibiza, didn't it? No one wanted to go to Ibiza after watching Ibiza Uncovered, including myself. And I was like, Peter, I'm not going to come to Ibiza. Why would I want to come there? It looks disgusting. And he's like, no, there's another side. There's another side to it. So I suppose 99 in July, he convinced me to come. So I went over and discovered the other side. And I nearly lived there at that point, interestingly, because I went to one of the hippie markets, and then there was this guy with long blonde dreads, and he was like, he was selling something there, and we were talking, I don't know, he was saying something about some party, or it was there's a big trance scene there too, in the countryside, and he was like, come to this, why don't you just come and live in Ibiza, just come, just stay. And I was like, oh, maybe I could just stay. But I was like, that's interesting, but how would I stay here? And my left brain started doing all that analytical stuff. So I was kind of left with that thought, the possibility of living there, because I was there for 10 days. I went back to London, continued doing my IT contracting. I was also doing acting and casting, all sorts of other stuff, and then the music thing. So I was doing lots of stuff I was enjoying, apart from the IT stuff, in London anyways. But I started to go out every year with a bunch of friends, and we'd hire a villa for a week, and then we'd go out partying as you did. But I would always get this message in my head every couple of years or few years, like, why aren't you living in Ibiza yet, Simone? Why aren't you? And I was like, what? Where is this coming from? And I was always just discounted, like, how am I going to live in Ibiza? I'm not going to go and be a promo girl or do this, that, and the other thing. Like, how can you ever live there? It's so amazing. How does anyone live there? Kind of feeling. It wasn't until about 2009, and I just got this message in my head again. And at that point, I'd split from my husband, who I'd done Kitchen Party with, and actually who I'd started DJing with, and we'd done the live stuff with. And I was in that point where I was just like, well, I can do anything, but it was like, why don't you live in Ibiza? And then I set an intention, just kind of accidentally, and it was like, okay, as soon as I'm earning like enough money online, like £200 a week online, I'll move there. And sure enough, within probably, what was it, like, well, it was 2.5 years, I guess, I was. And I had just designed this, I'd kind of got into health and well-being and been on this little spiritual mission after I'd split, and I went traveling and stuff, and then met someone else. But anyways, I had started become a raw vegan, and I'd started making my own nut milk, and then I designed a bag to make the nut milk at home with. I don't know if you know much about nut milk. You can make it at home with a blender and water and stuff. But I designed technically like this bag, and it was a nut milk bag, and I started giving away to friends, and I did it on eBay, and it was selling reasonably well. I moved down to London, and then I was selling it, and then I started an Amazon account, and then I had 4 Amazon accounts. And then so I had enough nut milk bag orders every week that I was getting like £200 a week in, after costs. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to move to Ibiza. And my partner at the time, we moved to Ibiza, and then we were sewing nut milk bags in a tent in the first place for 6 weeks. And sewing nut milk bags was the way I got to Ibiza, to be able to live there. And then of course, when you get there, it just becomes this weird place. It's just got, like you say, there's nothing like Ibiza. There's some sort of magic there. that happens. And islands have this thing, and it's the same thing here. They can be quite tricky and challenging to live on. The weather can be a bit chaotic and strong, and also how do you live there, how do you work there, and how do you make a living, and people always talk about the island will just kick you off. You'll find this in most islands. I've found that anyway. And so Ibiza will just kick you out if you're not meant to stay there, especially in the winter when it closes down and there's nothing but to do but just to be with yourself and look at yourself. But in saying that, there's something about Ibiza where you suddenly go, wow, the world's my oyster. What can I do here? I could do anything. So I started doing these organic skincare workshops, which I was already making all my own organic skincare, and I'd done a couple of workshops in London. So I started doing that, and then I started making a lot of raw vegan food and raw vegan chocolate, which I don't agree with anymore. I don't agree with raw cacao at all. It's not a health food, but that's another story. So I was making that at the artesian farmers market every weekend. So you end up doing about 2 or 3 or 4 different things to make it happen in Ibiza. Well, most people do, a lot of people, especially when you first arrive. And there's so many things you can do if you have the intention to stay and you're open to it. So that's how I ended up there. And it was for the love of the music. And I really wanted to get out of London originally, and out of England, out of the concrete. I just wanted to be in nature, but still be around music.
Yeah. It's really interesting how many people try and make it work by living in Ibiza, but do the typical kind of jobs, working in a bar, all this kind of stuff, and then you were there making nut milk bags and raw vegan food. I think that's awesome. It's just your creative brain again.
Yeah. Well, the manifesting really cool. Generator, doing a million different things, and people are like, "What? You're doing that now? You're doing that now? Yep, okay."
Yeah, I love it. Did you ever play over there then? Was DJing ever a thing in Ibiza when you were there? For you?
Yeah, so after I'd split from my husband in 2009, I really backed off the scene because I gave him Kitchen Party the concept, which was just like giving him my child because it was just so much my creative thing. But he destroyed it, and unfortunately, he sort of took it into the clubs, and it wasn't about that. It was about house party. So I was really just heartbroken with the whole music scene, and I didn't want to be anywhere near it. So I just kind of took a break for probably 2 years. But I got a nice gig in Alguna in Egypt, playing at this nice club in 2011. So I went over there and did, I don't know, 3 or 4 gigs over a week. And then I started doing a few things in the health scene in London at some of the little gatherings they did. It wasn't really my thing though, although I enjoyed the sort of new agey kind of healthy thing. I also really liked the clubbing scene, but I wanted to meld the two, but there was never this in-between ground sort of thing. And Ibiza is a little bit the same. But I just started, again, doing my own parties. I've always thrown parties. I've done it since I was young. I've always liked to create things like that. So in Ibiza, that's where I met my current playmate, Julio, who's somewhere. He's over there, you can't see him. And we started throwing parties at his house, which is like a 500-year-old Ibiza farmhousey kind of thing, but you could call it a villa, I suppose. But it's got the big thick walls, the little windows and the typical kind of thing on top of a hill in the middle of nowhere. And so we could always do a party, and we would never have any problems. So we started doing a thing called Cosmic Games there. And this kind of got me back into DJing a bit. People understood, because I went there and no one knew that I had any kind of history in doing music in London. So kind of like starting over in a way and having to prove myself. And it was a whole different scene, and they all like different music, the people who live there anyway. And I didn't really think about like promoting myself to any of the big clubs. For some reason, I didn't think about it, even though I was, I'd done that kind of thing before, or produced promo CDs and stuff. But we just did our own thing. And then I started playing at different villa parties, and then I had a few gigs at different beach bars and stuff. And then we did some big after parties with Sven Vath and Richie Horton at our place. So we did the Enter after party and the Cocoon after party at our house.
Wow, that's incredible.
From 8 a.m. in the morning till midnight.
Jeez.
which was intense. After we did the Richie Horton one, and I told them off, I had to tell them off at one point. We decided to do the Sven Bath one a different way, and it worked much better energetically. So yeah, we kind of went through, Julia and I, we sort of like go through different, there was the hippie scene we're involved in, and the fashion. I sometimes play at like a gallery thing, played at Underground Club, which is probably my favorite club. I don't know if you ever went there. It probably plays the best music, to be honest, as well. It's on the road between San Antonio and Ibiza town.
Okay.
It's more intimate, kind of, more like a UK style club, rather than the big brash kind of VIP style stuff that's happening now, which is the reason we left in the end, because it was just like, okay, this is too much. But it still has, what year did we leave?
What year did you leave?
Yeah, so we had this quite famous fashion designer come to us and want to buy a house because it had no neighbors and stuff, and we're like, it's not for sale. But then after about a year, we're like, okay, maybe we're getting some signs that we don't want to be here anymore. It was becoming a bit yummy mummy-ish, and it was just like Russian prostitutes, and it was just too much VIP, and it was just like, oh god, it was just lots of signs, and we were trying to do medical marijuana and all sorts of different things weren't happening for us. So we're like, okay, well, maybe we'll just we contacted her, and she gave us this offer, and we said, okay, we'll think about it. And then we took the offer in the end and left. And so we left at the end of 2016, but we kept going back every year and we'd stay like 3 months until we got to 2020 and ended up staying here, and we haven't left New Zealand since. So we've still got stuff in Ibiza and our motorhome there and things. We're planning to go there this winter. Yeah, so we left, but still has a place in our heart.
Well, I think for anyone who's been to Ibiza with a passion for music, it probably has a place in their heart, no matter what time of the last 2 decades they went there. I often find, I used to call Ibiza just an adult playground, because it really is an adult playground. It's just like you go to these clubs and you just look around you and you just like, these are adults that just still want to play, but just in a very adult way, and connect with music and connect with each other. And obviously, the narcotic scene does fuel the island quite a bit, but I've always said that, drugs and music go hand in hand. And I don't truly believe that the electronic music scene would be what it is today without the drugs. I mean, what do you reckon?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and the other direction too, when you've got the bad drugs, and the way the scene's gone that way. And actually, interestingly, like when we did these after parties, everyone was wearing black, and we were like, okay, how can we deal with this? So we hadn't, we knew that what it was going to be like in a way, and we had all this fresh fruit, and we would just give fresh fruit out to people, and they were like, oh wow, we just really brought a light energy to it all and shifted the energy. But yeah, I don't think it would be the same without all of the happy, fun stuff too that everyone enjoyed, and the connecting, and it is an adult's playground. I mean, when I was there, I always referred to it like it was like a full-time festival. It was, everyone's there, and they're there, and they can't really escape. And we would, we'd have our little party or whatever it was, and then you'd go home. People would go home to feed their dog or their cat, and then they'd come back, and then you'd go to this place and that place, and so it was just a full-time festival, basically.
Yeah, for sure. What was your favorite club back in the day? If you had to pick one.
Yeah, I mean, when I went in, the first time I went in 99 was the first time that DC10 opened. Oh, well, DC10 was already open as a little bar, the side of the road kind of thing. But it was the first time they did Circle Loco, and I went with my friend Peter, and it was purely a day party then. Although it did go into the night a little bit, but it started at 8 a.m. in the morning, and you'd go to Space, and then you'd go straight there. And that was the most fun. I mean, and then there was a time in between where you went to Jockey Club, which is a different jockey club now, but it was the other jockey club, which is at the other beach, which I can't think of right now, but you go Space on Sundays, obviously, and then Jockey Club, and then Circo Loco DC10, and that was fun, and it was just like beautiful, like open air. So yeah, that was the best time, when space was open air, when they didn't have anything, with no roof, and that when Circo Loco was, when it just had the sail above it. That was definitely my favorite time. And like I said, Underground Club, if is one of the rest of them, can kind of take them or leave them. If there's a good artist playing, we'll go. We used to go along. We would still go along, but generally, not really. Yeah.
I completely agree. Although I think when I went, it had become a little bit more well known to when you went. The Space Sundays and the DC10 the day after was awesome. I don't know what it was about DC10. For me, I think it was just the rawness of the club, and it was kind of just like shit. There's planes flying overhead. It's just literally an old airport hangar, and it just felt really almost kind of wrong to be in there partying, but at the same time, it was just so kind of right. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And you'd have such fun little interactions with everyone. Everyone's so friendly, and you're just there because the music's so fun and just great. And just, it's daytime. I like daytime partying. I prefer that. I prefer to play my music in nature. It's some much better energies. Some of the weird, like darker energies can come out at night as well, from people and wherever. But yeah, daytime partying, and it's a shame because there's just not that much of it anymore in Ibiza.
Mm-hmm. How do you? So obviously you've spent a lot of time in New Zealand. You've spent a lot of time over the other side of the world. What do you think the main difference? I mean, we've obviously got a scene here. I think since I came here permanently, it's literally gone like that several times. And when I came here, it was very drum and bass dominant. Do you think that the scene, because you've obviously been here since 2020 now permanently, you've obviously been part of the scene. How do you think it is now in comparison to previous years, and then maybe in comparison to overseas? Like, do you feel like it's growing, or do you feel like it's kind of just fading out?
I mean, it's difficult for me to say because I haven't spent much time out there in the scene in Auckland, even though it's only like a 25-minute plane ride. I spent most of the time on the island, and haven't really been out too much unless I get asked to play over there. But from what I can see on Facebook and the friends I know that are involved in the scene, there seems to be a lot more going on, and there's some really cool little day parties and stuff happening, which is, really exciting. So it seems to be like it's growing, and there's lots more youngsters coming in, and there seems to be a lot of more youngsters who are up for the minimal sound too, which is great because that just gives such a great vibe, in my opinion. So it seems to be growing, and people are a bit more open to different, different sounds, different ways of doing things. It seems to be, well, challenged in that, it's never been easy to put on a night. There's a lot at stake, there's money involved, and people just don't get paid as much here to DJ, or they expect you to play from nothing, which is hard because you put a lot of effort into it, and every hour that you spend, preparing for the gig as well, and then all this, the music that you buy, it's your time, and I think everyone, should be rewarded for that. But it's difficult when there's not that much, and everyone's also, struggling these days financially. You could see it with the whole festival scene this summer, compared to last summer. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, it's definitely different here.
That was kind of the premise for my question, I guess, because it appears this last sort of 12 months has been really difficult, for the festival scene in particular. We both played at Shipwrecks this year, and it's a fantastic festival, but obviously Logan expressed that they were down on numbers in comparison to previous years, and I think that's the same sentiment to nearly every other festival in New Zealand, over the last 6 to 7 months, maybe. And I think the same has been felt in some of the bars and the clubs, maybe in Auckland, especially in Wellington, when we actually had clubs here. And but it's nice because every single time I ask someone that question, everyone's convinced that the scene is growing and that there's more going on. And I do see that. And I believe that we're about to enter one of those peaks again, where there's so much going on. I guess it's just quite difficult in New Zealand because we don't have that many people here, and electronic music and clubbing is still it's still a niche. It's still a niche, and because there isn't that many people, the availability of parties is making it very difficult to fill those parties, because there's so many going on, but there's so few people to actually attend them. So it's got to be pretty difficult out there for promoters. I did a few gigs under the High Frequency brand at Ink Bar last year, and one of them was great, filled out, was awesome. I didn't really need to make an effort, but then only 4 months later I did another one, and it was the complete opposite. Lost a lot of money on that one, which is all good, but the predictability is, well, I guess it's very unpredictable, which makes it very difficult for people out there. So that's just my insight, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I find Auckland a bit of a weird city. It's not like London where you can just jump on the tube or you can jump on a bus home late at night. Everyone's got to be very wary of of driving under the influence or whatever, and also expense getting a taxi home and that sort of thing. It's not as easy to go out, and it's not necessarily, it's not the most beautiful kind of scene in a way, like the clubs and stuff. It's not, I don't know, it's just not but maybe it's just I've just grown out of going out at nighttime so much, and there's not, everything feels a bit sort of scattered, where you've got like places like, I don't know, where I'm trying to think of my actually Munich comes to mind because I was in Munich for a few months when I was waiting to come back for university, and there was a whole sort of area that you could drive to, and there were just 10-15 clubs there, so everything is kind of scattered, and Auckland is so big as well. It doesn't feel like it's sort of connected, although the clubbing scene does feel connected here and like a community, which it is. It's a funny kind of scene, but it's also different for me because I'm not living in Auckland. I mean, maybe if I was in Auckland, I would start a club night or something. I mean, we've had ideas of doing something here, but then there's only 1,000 people here, and then then also trying to get people over here and get used to how they could get over here, and how they could make it cheap for them to come here, and there's a lot more involved with doing a club night, I think, in Auckland. Or New Zealand, because like you say, there's just not the people. But then then there are people, and then maybe people just need to get introduced more to the music, and educated on how much fun it is, and how healthy it is to dance and get out and enjoy yourself and connect.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I just wish money wasn't such a big factor, but it has to be, because otherwise none of this would be able to happen, would it? So, but yeah, when money comes into play, it complicates things. And I guess, we're a very financially focused society, so it's a difficult one. But I mean, like you say, the scene is growing. We've got to have some faith in it. It's never going to be, and we shouldn't compare it to places like London and Ibiza, because it's never going to be that. But if it can have its own bubble and it can continue growing and we can expose more people to it, the better. And I guess, going back to something you said earlier on, that whole, you were always trying to educate people about music, with your radio show, and just choosing the certain records to a certain crowd. I guess one question that I like to ask people, with the amount of experience that you have, for example, is how important do you feel educating the crowd is these days? And where do you feel the most comfortable to do that? Because I know that when I play in New Zealand, sometimes I feel like I can't go really out there with my musical taste, because I feel like sometimes it's just going to clear the dance floor and not be accepted. Whilst you can do that in London, because people they'll accept it for the most part. So do you feel like you need to educate the crowd? Or like at Shipwreck this year, for example, like how much education did you consciously do there, or did you just play records that you thought people might like to enjoy?
Very good question. Uh, yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm always educating the crowd with the music I play, because generally the music I play, I don't really hear people play the records I play out often. And yeah, I like to go from, sashay between different genres, different feelings, different sounds. And yeah, and it's all about feeling for me. So it's just something that makes people feel good or feel something in a certain way. But yeah, in New Zealand, yeah, I suppose it can be a bit difficult, yeah, in some ways. Although people are seemingly more open to it. I think the more that we play, I mean, the more that there's a lot more people playing the sound that I like enjoy and that I play. There's a lot more people playing minimal house um, and deeper stuff recently. So people's ears are getting educated. I think it takes many years for you to fine tune your ears to understand the intricacies in the minimal sound. And not think, oh, it just sounds like it's nothing's happening, it's the same old sound, because there's a delicateness to it all, that you can only pick up on after you've gone through trance, hard house, the very obvious kind of things. Um, on the general scheme of things, it seems like the youngsters, for the most part, have been just being educated. I mean, this goes for just mainstream music too, by very basic sounds, like the EDM sound. Or, I mean, I see so many, so many that come through my Facebook feed, so many young girls playing techno. And they've obviously taught themselves through COVID, and now they're up there and they're doing the Instagrammy sort of thing, and it's all a show. But it all sounds the same, and it's all just really fast and really aggressive and really dark, and it's just like, okay, yeah, it's tricky. But I think the thing is, I asked this young girl this question. Actually, it was like a few years ago. I was it was in an airport or something, and I was in the shop, and there was this terrible music playing. I think it was a kind of an EDM kind of track, and I just said to her, do you actually like this kind of music? And she was like, not really. But she's like, but there's not much else that we hear. And the thing is, if they don't hear it, they just don't get educated. They don't understand. They don't know. And I think people are open to it. It's just playing it enough so people, get used to it. And it's, familiarity breeds something or other. I can't think what it is.
I know what you mean.
But yeah, I think it's just the more that people hear the sounds that that are different, then they get used to it, and they can start to understand it more.
Yeah.
But a lot of the stuff is very repetitive and predictable. I'm not into predictable kind of sounds at all. I like it to be unpredictable, syncopated beats. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The you said a couple of important things there, because like you, obviously, I'm very much into minimal, and I when I first started going out, it was I could only really gel with houseier music because it had a lot of energy, it had build-ups, it had drops, that kind of stuff, and I think because the younger New Zealand crowd are quite drum and bass heavy, most of them at least anyway. That is a very like techno, like these young girls that you were referring to that are playing techno. It's super super intense and doesn't have any waves of energy. It's just up here all the time. And I think, with minimal, because it does have a lot of waves of energy, and you've got to respect the parts where it does come down and the subtlety of certain sounds, it's kind of boring for them. They don't get that energy rush off it. So I do think like it does take many years for your ears to become accustomed to that type of music, and I agree. The more that we expose them to it, the more that their taste will refine. Not that it needs to, but obviously, if we want to play more of that kind of music, it needs to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm,
And the energy, I think, for me, it's like a lot of the music doesn't have soul,
yeah.
whatever that means, but it's just something that gets you like the energy. You're just talking like waves of energy. Yeah, yeah.
Mm. So, just to wrap this up, then, because we've been going for nearly an hour and a half, and I wasn't expecting to talk this much, but I'm obviously fascinated by your history and everything that you've got to offer. So, I've really appreciated this conversation. But just sort of rolling on from the education piece that we just talked about, there are a lot of new DJs in the scene, a lot of new female DJs as well. And, obviously back when you started DJing, there was probably not that many female DJs around. I'm sure that you were, one of very few in London that did it. And not to get into a gender thing, but, if you were to sort of give any advice to some of maybe the younger, preferably female DJs or any DJ, what would that be? Something that you've learned over the years. It can be many things, but what would you say to those younger DJs?
Yeah, it was a challenge in London at times. At times, I did feel like throwing in the towel because I would be playing. I remember distinctly this time at AKA Bar, and I was playing, and then I'd only been playing 20 minutes, and suddenly there was this guy there, and he's just like as if he's like going to go on. I was like, "Excuse me, like what are you doing?" kind of thing. And it was a challenge being a female. Yeah, there were people like Lottie who was very inspiring, so she kind of kept me going. And it was like in the hard house scene, it was like Lisa Lashes and can't think who else can come to mind. But there's a lot of also amazing female DJs who are still playing, who've been around for much longer than me. But yeah, I mean, you just have to go with your feeling of what you enjoy playing, I think, and not try to keep what am I trying to say? uh, just because if you become like everyone else, then you're not going to stand out, I guess, and do anything different. It's always good to just keep your individuality and go with the music you love. Um, and well, that's what I do anyway. That's the only reason I feel like DJing. It's not about playing for money and or fame. It's about sharing music that people don't hear that makes me feel good, and hopefully it makes them feel good too. Um, and just have faith in yourself. That and if you're not meant to do it, you're not meant to do it, but you'll find a flow. And for younger DJs coming out, I suppose what I would suggest is having a go at learning how to mix on vinyl, although it can be tricky because you need the equipment and stuff, but it is a good way to learn how the beats work together and how they match, and not get too left brainy about the whole thing. um, and it's a shame because most new DJs will have missed out on the whole vinyl scene. I mean, in London, it was this, like you're saying, it was such a great time, and especially before any of the digital stuff came in, before we were playing on CDJs. It was all vinyl, and you just get there, and it would be a dark room, and all you could see was this really nice yellow warm glow of the light, on the record, and then the DJ would be there. He'd put a record down, and then you'd know he was just there rustling, rummaging through his bag. He'd get this new record out and put it on, and it was such an interaction with the crowd and a connection. And I went back to London when I was living in Ibiza. I went back for a friend's 40th, and we went to a disco night. She decided to go to this disco night, and it was like 4 floors of disco in this kind of warehouse in South London somewhere, and they were all playing vinyl. And it wasn't until I got there that I really saw the difference, because you walked into the room, there was no LED light. There was no big bright fluorescent light from a laptop or the Apple thing shining through. There was no distraction for the DJ looking sideways at it. There was just these nice glows, and then them playing vinyl, and it was on every single floor. And it was like, this is how it used to be. It was this darkened room with some cool lights and stuff, and then you'd see the DJ, and you'd be in that whole nice interaction with them, and you could hear the music going out, and then you'd be like, yeah, get it back in, So I would say if you've got an opportunity to just go and have a play with some vinyl, it's a really nice idea just to get that feeling of how the music works together, and how it used to be, and try and bring a bit more of that creativity back into it, perhaps.
Yeah.
Don't get too in the head with what you're doing.
It's so easy, isn't it? It's so easy to get too in the head. But no, I think those are some really wise words. And, hopefully some of the younger DJs that are listening do take a leaf out of your book and do decide to experiment with that. Because I agree with you. It's okay coming from you and me who have done it in the past and also played digitally as well and realized the difference. But I do think there's something special about playing with real records, and it makes you appreciate your music a little bit more as well, and it makes you appreciate, the time it takes to mix a record into the other one without using the sync button. So,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, look, thanks for the chat. I honestly think I could chat to you for another 3 hours. We haven't even touched on production yet, which is like a whole separate chat that I really wanted to talk to you about, because that's kind of all I do. And I'm sure that you've dabbled in production in the past. But look, maybe we'll have to get you back on the podcast and talk about production at some point in the near future,
I'd love to, because that would inspire me. I've made about 3 tracks over the years, and it's one of those things I really want to get. I just feel like I've got so much music in my head, and I'm just like, I don't want to sit in front of a computer and do this. And I'm just like, but it's obviously not meant to be my moment to do it. But having a chat with it would be, inspiration about it.
We'll have to have a meetup at Herman's house and play on all his modular gear.
Yeah.
Just putting it out there.
Yeah, a visit to Raglan.
Sounds like that place would be right up your alley anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much. Yeah, cool. Well, let me know if you make it there. I'll join you.
Yeah, will do.
Well, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. I really appreciate it. And it's been really, really interesting to hear about your journey and hear about, someone who started in the 90s and is still playing today. Because there's not a lot of people that last that long. There's a lot of people that kind of fall off the scene pretty easily and don't stick with what they believe their passion is. So I really appreciate that. It's cool.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, for some reason, I just, not for some reason, I mean, for the love of it, isn't it? I just, even if I don't play that many gigs and I'm sort of picky and choosy, I have to always keep having my toe in it, because otherwise it's just something about music and creativity, and especially, and throwing parties and playing the music at parties is just such a love of mine. So I have to keep doing it, whether or not I'm, superstar DJ flying around the world, which would be completely exhausting, I imagine.
It would.
Or not. Yeah, just happy to do it when I can, and I really treasure those moments when I'm able to do that.
Awesome. Well, if you get back to Ibiza, have some fun, and I might catch you at Shipwreck Festival next year.
Yeah, well, hopefully get to meet you at some point soon. We're going to pop over this weekend, maybe, and have a little holiday off the island.
Cool.
Always good to get away. But yeah, no, thank you for the chat. It's been great.
Yeah, really it has. Yeah, thanks for joining me. And just before you go, if people want to catch what you do and maybe want to connect with you, where can people go to find you?
Well, at the moment, I've just got all my mixes on Mixcloud. So it would just be /Simone Fougère. And same for SoundCloud. And I've been trying to just keep SoundCloud as my productions, which there's none on there at the moment, apart from the radio show. If you want to go and listen to that, we did about 50 in the end shows, but the first 20 are really the history of electronic music. So yeah, and then Facebook, I've got a page where I put gigs and stuff, cool. When I've been doing them.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'll put all the links to everything that you've just mentioned in the description of this podcast, and hopefully people can check you out and listen to the history of music.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to hearing your track too that you've just mixed down.
Yes. Yeah. I'll tell everyone about that shortly. All right. Thanks, Simone. Cool. It's been great.
Okay. Thanks, Adam.
Bye.